Bagimu, siapa seorang manusia yang berhak dikatakan punya makna? Apakah dia yang memilih menetap di hidupmu? Atau dia yang ditakdirkan hanya mampir sementara waktu? Apakah makna manusia dimiliki mereka yang selalu punya kuasa untuk menggerakkan? Atau mereka yang terkadang membutuhkan pegangan untuk bertahan? Karena jika kita mau memahami, semuanya punya perannya sendiri-sendiri. Dia yang di dalam rumah dan berdiam diri, yang harus melakukan sesuatu, yang merisikokan diri sendiri, yang menjaga, yang bertahan, juga ia yang harus pergi. Pada akhirnya, sesulit apapun untuk diterima, manusia bukan hanya sebuah nama, bukan juga deretan angka. Setiap manusia, disadari ataupun tidak, punya maknanya sendiri-sendiri bagi hidup kita.
Oke. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillahirrabbilalamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala asrafil anbiya'i wa mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'du. First of all, thanks to Allah for letting us having this moment in good health and in good conditions. Secondly, I would like to thank to our speaker, our distinguished speaker, Dr. Salman Sheikh. He is a special guest for us because he present this session far away from Pakistan, Karachi, Pakistan. So basically, our speaker, Dr. Salman Ahmad Sheikh, is assistant professor of finance from SESBIS, a university in Karachi, Pakistan. He get his PhD in economics from UKM, or National University of Malaysia. And in this very exciting moment, we will discuss about mainstream and Islamic economics in dealing and anticipating with COVID-19. So, Assalamualaikum, Dr. Salman.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, I hope you are fine in Pakistan despite this issue about COVID-19.
Yes, Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So I will give a bit overview about our discussion today. Then you will discuss further, inshallah. So, as we all know, currently we have an issue that disrupts all the normal activity around the world. The pandemic of COVID-19, where the number of the cases keep increasing, create many issues. One of them is in economics. It is a big deal. Global financial market close to collapse, increasing number of unemployment, many issues. And facing these issues, I found many anomalies. Firstly, if we really implement free market economics, such as wage cut, healthcare cut, and let the invisible hand works, it creates an issue in the society, especially for the poor. Even if we want to have government intervention in this capitalistic system, we still find an anomaly. We see, private company, when they are economically in good condition, only top few can enjoy the moment. But when there is a downturn in the economy, like currently because of COVID-19, the people fund by the government will be used to bail out the companies. Another anomaly that I see in our mainstream economics is how I found the economics introduce homo economicus, where we as humans should try to maximize our own utility, our own interests over others. how does this concept that is based on greediness can be a sustainable way where the world currently need to have each other. The rich need to have the poor. We need to we need to have the neighborhood and many else. On the other hand, Islamic economy claim to be a better way or even the best way in dealing such crises. The economics introduce homo Islamicus as opposed to homo economicus, where there is a moral filter that is used in articulating economics activity. This economics embed ethical by nature, and by doing so, this economics claim to be more sustainable and being better alternative. So, Dr. Salman, time is yours to discuss this further, inshallah. Tafadhal mashkuro.
Thank you for a very comprehensive introduction, which gives us the overview about the mainstream economics and also the Islamic economics. So I would like to share my thoughts, and before I start, I would like to thank Ustaz Baznas for inviting me to share some thoughts here. My talk would be about discussing few of the shortcomings in mainstream economics, and then I would also discuss some of the characteristics and features in Islamic economics which make it more effective in dealing with situations of crisis such as the one that we are facing right now. So my topic would first discuss the shortcomings in mainstream economics, and then I would discuss that how some of these shortcomings can be overcome in the Islamic economic framework through the set of institutions, principles, and teachings that we have in the paradigm of Islamic economics. So can we move to the slides so that I can focus my discussion and the audience can also follow it. So this is going to be my presentation outline. So you can see that the two major parts that we are going to discuss today is, first of all, to have a critical look into the field of mainstream economics. And then after that, we are also going to discuss the Islamic approach to economics and society. Now, when I say Islamic approach to economics and society, it's very important to understand that economics or economy is not the focal point of humans or human behavior or human relationships. So when we look around, we see that we focus a lot on just the economic part of human beings, whereas economy is just part of the society. Society has not just economics, but also other things which are also very important. So when Islam addresses human beings and how they should conduct themselves personally or collectively, it talks in a greater context of the society and not just focusing or concentrating on one aspect of society, which is the economy or the market economy. So let me first begin with discussion of mainstream economics and what are the different shortcomings that we see in mainstream economics, which make us face certain crises from time to time, and then we remain inadequate to deal with such crisis. So can we move to the next slide? So first of all, I would discuss that in the mainstream economics, there are certain premises which are used as foundation for mainstream economics, but these premises are not scientific or are true. So I would give some examples of the negative premises on which the field of mainstream economics is built. First of all, we have studied economics. Some of us have taken courses in economics, and we know that we start with the fundamental so-called fact that resources are scarce and we have unlimited wants. Now, this is a premise which is presented as a fact. Whereas if we look around and if we look at the statistics, it does not look like a fact. For instance, in discussion of wants, there is no distinction between needs and wants in mainstream economics. So whether it is essential need or a comforting need or a luxurious want, economics does not make distinction between the ends to which the resources may be utilized. So it says that resources are scarce for needs as well as wants. Whereas if we look at the data, especially about food per capita, we see that in the last 50 years, the food per capita globally has risen. So it has been increasing. So in this sense, we do not see that there is less food so that people cannot meet their basic needs of survival. So the issue is of distribution. And this has been well documented by several researchers, including the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen, who studied famines in different parts of the world and concluded that in those famines, the problem of hunger was not caused because of scarcity of food. The issue was with the distribution of resources. So if we look at the problem from the distribution point of view, then we have a different scenario and a different perspective. But if we take this position that resources are scarce even for the survival needs, then we would be more greedy, more competitive, more selfish, and this would reflect in our behavior and choices as well. Now, if we look at this statistic that there are about 600 million people who are still in extreme poverty. So if we give them $1 a day to feed these people, we would require about $600 million to feed every hungry person who is facing extreme poverty. And on the other hand, we see that around $2.75 billion value of food is wasted every day. So this is quite a remarkable statistic. It means that we have the resources and the problem is not with the availability, but with the distribution. And when distribution is organized only through market, or if we rely only through the market system, then it is quite possible that people who are not skillful, who do not have anything to supply in the resource market, they might remain poor, they might remain underserved, they might remain hungry. And economics emphasizing on market outcomes or market norms would not have anything to do with these kinds of people. The second premises which we see in mainstream economics is that people pursue selfish self-interest in economic models. Now, we might say that people are going to pursue their self-interest, which might also incorporate selfless choices. But when we look at the economic models, in economic models, the choice is only concerned with the person's own self. So when we look at the utility maximization model, the utility is maximized by choosing the goods and services for self-consumption, not for consumption of others. And we take these kinds of assumptions like monotonicity, which means that more is always better than less, because we have put this idea into economics that resources are scarce and we have unlimited wants. So what we should do with our resources is that we should exhaust them fully so that we can achieve as much of our wants as possible, be it they need, be it they wants which are not the survival needs. So in economic models, when we look at the agent behavior, whether it is consumer or producer, we see that the agent is maximizing his or her utility. Or when we talk about producer, the producer is trying to maximize profit by exhausting all the resources. Now, when this kind of assumption is made, then there would be no charity, no philanthropy, no use of the budget constraint into choices that help others, because we are going to be then self interested and looking at only our own self. Another thing which comes in mainstream economics is that it assumes that every behavior, every choice that we undertake, it is for our own self-interest, which means that there cannot be pure altruism. Altruism is going to be judged as an impure act, an impure action. So, in the paradigm of self-interest, the altruism is going to be defined as maybe people are doing it because they want to have warm feeling, they want to satisfy their ego, they want to improve their social image, they want to have some fame or publicity out of the pro-social behavior that they exhibit in public space, or they might be doing altruism because they want to ensure themselves against the social unrest. Now, we know from fact and our own experience and from our own behavior and from our own society that these are not necessarily the motives that one has when one engages in altruism. So economics is just focusing on the self-interested behavior. It does not account for people making sacrifices, people doing pro-social behavior, and people having honest intention or purity in their actions and hearts. This is not recognized in economics. That is why one famous economist, James Andrioni, when he discusses philanthropy or altruism, he says that altruism is impure, but because at the end of the day, the person who is doing altruism is basically just trying to maximize his or her self-interest. Can we go to the next slide? So we can discuss two more premises which are at the foundation of mainstream economics, and these are very problematic, and these do not give us the right picture of how humans behave in society. So in economic models, it is the individualistic economic agent that is supposed to be making choices, and we do not consider family as a unit. We do not regard people living in families and getting some important benefits from the institution of family. So in economic models, we see that an individual is a single person. There is no role of family, and the social capital that comes from the institution of family is completely overlooked. So when we do economic modeling, the representative agent for whom we are solving the utility maximization problem or the profit maximization problem gets young, educated, skillful exogenously, automatically, naturally, and we do not discuss that there is a role of family in bringing up a person to be able to have the skills, education, and to be able to then enter labor market and enter into goods market to engage in economic behavior. And we assume that the person is individualistic, and in the life cycle models we assume that a person saves for retirement and uses the insurance and accumulated savings to fulfill the needs in the post-retirement stage of life. Now this kind of a perspective about humans is going to encourage greediness, is going to encourage wealth concentration, is going to encourage wealth accumulation, because I would not have a job at the end of my life, at the tail end of my life. Why should I behave altruistically in the young years of my life? Why? Because I have to save for my post-retirement life. So this kind of a perspective about human beings encourages greediness, encourages self-centeredness, encourages accumulation of wealth to deal with the post-retirement needs of life. There is no social insurance, and there is no role of family that is recognized in these models. And another very important thing is that economics remains neutral between ends. So when choices are made, whether these choices are moral, whether they are ethical, whether they serve the social need, whether they violate some values or norms, is not the concern of economics. So a person having some available resources in the budget, the person can use it to buy luxury car or could feed hungry. Economics is neutral, and economics would implicitly argue that a person should engage in self-interested behavior, and it would regard altruism as complete nonsense or as an impure way to gain some psychological benefit for oneself. So feeding hungry would not be a very rational choice in the economic models. Likewise, there are going to be lots of situations where a person faced with pursuing self-interest or doing pro-social behavior, economics would be neutral and would regard each behavior as much admissible into its paradigm as any other. So it would remain neutral between ends. Can we go to the next slide? All right. So we have discussed few examples of where mainstream economics foundation is not quite consistent with how people behave. Now, here we have not discussed whether a religious person would behave differently from these assumptions. These assumptions are going to be not holding even for a person who is not necessarily very religious. But we see that people are engaging in pro-social behavior, engaging in altruism, engaging in non-economic behavior where the motivation is not necessarily economic or selfishness, but still economics would regard every human behavior to be directed towards selfish pursuit of self-interest. Now, another problem that comes in mainstream economics is that it overlooks the role of extractive financial institutions. And one of the chief extractive financial institution is the institution of lending based on interest, lending based on usury. So in this system, we see that there is collateral based lending, which excludes the poor. So poor can only save with a financial institution, but when they want to borrow, they have to show collateral. They have to show that they are wealthy enough and they have enough income so that they can pay the usury or interest to the lender. So usually the poor people are having much less access to the credit services of a financial institution as compared to rich person. And when it comes to saving with the bank, it is the small savers with limited income who are basically saving and giving their surplus savings to the financial institution. So this system inherently concentrates wealth. It takes wealth from a large number of small savers and then give it to a small number of large and wealthy corporations and individuals. And it also has the element of compound interest, which weakens the weaker more in a vicious debt cycle. So if you are not able to repay the loan in first go, in first cycle, then the next time you have to pay even higher interest because of the nature of compound interest. So it would weaken the weaker more in a vicious debt cycle, and then the weak person or the weak borrower or the institution is going to engage in activities that help it survive, and that would involve maybe not being responsible to the society, not being responsible to the environment, not being responsible to the consumers. So wherever everyone gets the chance to get more benefit, the person would be supposed to do that. Why? Because the person has to service the compound interest on the debt. And the debt servicing in this system is necessary irrespective of economic conditions. So no matter whether the economy is going through a expansionary period or a recessionary period, it does not matter whether we are facing lockdown since last 1 month or 2 months. it does not matter to the lender. The only institution which is safe in this case is the lending institution, who is going to get a predetermined fixed interest over the amount of fiat money that is lent to the pupil. Now, pupil might get some benefit out of that money, or they might even have a loss, but then the lender is always going to get the fixed interest and predetermined interest, no matter whether the economic conditions are good or bad. And when we look at the case of lending and borrowing between countries, what we see is these exceeds the amount of aid these poor countries receive from the rich countries. So debt servicing in poor countries sometimes exceeds the aid inflows. So this system creates concentration of wealth towards the rich countries who are able to lend, and poor countries have to then sell their real sector output, their commodities, their natural resource as exports to be able to have enough money so that they can pay interest on fiat money that does not have any intrinsic value, and that is just a paper currency, but against which poor countries have to export their natural resources, which are having intrinsic value, and they are finite, and they are the real commodities, real assets. Now, another thing that we see in mainstream economics is that price mechanism is considered to be supreme, but it fails to capture externalities. So if a firm pollutes the air, pollutes the environment, it would not be captured in the price mechanism. The environmental damage is not going to be captured in price, whereas price mechanism is kept to be market driven, and government is supposed to not intervene in determining prices or influence the price mechanism. But the price mechanism does not incorporate essential information about the externalities that are there in exchange. So if there is pollution of air, if there is contamination of rivers and seas, it would not be incorporated into the price mechanism. The social harm, the external social cost that is put to the society is not going to be incorporated in the price mechanism. This is one failure of the price mechanism, where we do not remain able to incorporate the effect of externalities. And another very important point is that debt servicing of fiat money in fractional reserve system requires economic growth, because if there is no economic growth, then banks do not have enough money to be able to meet the withdrawal needs of the people. They only have a fraction of what they have lent out in a fractional reserve system. So if the economy is not growing, then if people come to get their funds withdrawn from the banks, banks would not have enough money to repay everyone. So in this scenario, economic growth is necessary. And if it means that economic growth has to be undertaken, even if nature is used up at a rate which is more than the sustainable rate for that natural resource, then even this would be admissible, this would be carried out, and we would not bother about damaging the environment beyond repair. We would engage in exchange of natural resources at a cheap price. But this is going to not only affect human beings, but also the environment and all the life forms that live within this environment and ecology. And this has happened. In the last 50 years or so, we have seen about 50% of animals have got extinct. There is loss of biodiversity at a colossal scale. And then there is a decrease in forest cover and contamination of oceans. And all of this is not incorporated in economics, in the price mechanism. Why? Because the negative externalities, these negative effects on environment, are not incorporated into the price of goods. So our lifestyle, our conspicuous consumption, our pursuit of selfish self-interest has not only brought concentration of resources in the human society, but has also damaged environment and the other life forms that remain in the environment. Now, can we move to the next slide? All right. Another very important point in mainstream economics is that there is overemphasis on market-based production and distribution. So it is supposed that if people want to meet their needs, they would have to buy those goods and services from the goods market. How do they get money? How do they earn money? They would earn money from the resource markets by supplying one of the factors of production, like land, like labor, like capital. But what about those people who do not have any factor of production to supply, who are unskilled and their labor is not demanded? What about those people who do not own any land? What about those people who do not have enough capital or savings to supply to a financial institution or to a firm? So these people would remain not able to earn their incomes from the resource markets, and then from the goods market they are not going to be able to buy the goods that they need. So in economics, when we ask this question, for whom to produce an essential need like a wheat, the answer in economics would be those people would be served with wheat who have the purchasing power, who have the dollar votes, not everyone. So if everyone requires to meet essential needs, the product is not going to be made for everyone. It is going to be made for people who demand. And when we talk about demand in economics, demand is wants backed up by purchasing power. So those poor people who are unable to afford wheat are going to be considered as having less willingness to pay for wheat, and they have maybe some other needs, which is quite absurd to imagine. Now, in economics, when we ask this question, what to produce, the answer would depend on produce something which maximizes the profit. Engage in investment in those industries which are having high levels of profits. So if there is an industry which is serving a non-essential need, a lavish luxury, but it has enough profits, then an industry which is serving a basic need, then according to economics, the rational choice is to serve those products first, which makes the producer earn maximum level of profit, not necessarily serving the essential needs of the society. And that is what we see around us, that there are 3G or 4G connections, internet connections, some other non-essential needs served more broadly than the other essential needs which people are not able to afford, even though they are technologically possible, even though they are not going to cost much, but people don't engage in the production and supply of those products which are essential if they have less profits on those things. So if sanitation or clean water is a problem in some localities, it might be technologically possible to overcome this problem, but it won't be done by the private sector through the market forces if the profits are not enough in sanitation as compared to some other businesses like telecommunication, video games, and so on. In economic models, it is assumed that we would either have shortage or surplus. In classical economics, it is assumed that there would always be equilibrium. And if there is disequilibrium, the disequilibrium would just be a aberration, would be an abnormality that would just correct itself instantaneously, automatically. So there would be no disequilibrium in classical economics. And even those who entertain the thought of having a disequilibrium situation, they would say that we would either have a shortage or a surplus, but not both at the same time. So if demand is more than supply, there would be a shortage. If supply is more than demand, there would be a surplus. Both will happen one at a time. They cannot exist simultaneously. But if we look at the real world, we see that there are unmet needs as well as unused resources. Now, this is considered to be impossible in economic models, whereas this is quite a stark reality. So if there is a hungry person who does not have work, that person would not fit in the analysis of economic choice behavior, because that person has an unmet need of not having enough food to survive and also does not have work. So there can be surplus resources like labor and as well as hunger, which is showing that there is shortage of food that people are able to buy from the market. So economic models also have this problem of not being able to capture reality as it stands. And also there is a tilted balance towards efficiency over equity. Those who have learned economics would know the concept of Pareto efficiency, which means that we have the best outcome and there is no better outcome that can be conceived. Now, if this Pareto efficiency is unequal, then it does not matter. We still give more preference or credence to the concept of Pareto efficiency. The concept of Pareto improvement says that there is a room for improvement. Now, if there is a situation where we do not have complete efficiency, but we have better distribution of resources, economics would not like such a situation, and it would give more value to the situation where we have Pareto efficiency, no matter howsoever the resources are distributed in a particular exchange. So if we engage in market behavior where producer gets all the welfare and the consumer has no welfare, and overall total welfare is maximum, this kind of a situation would be regarded as ideal, efficient. It's having no deadweight loss. But it is quite possible that another situation where the prices are not as much as the maximum that the producer could charge, but in such a situation the consumer won't be exploited and the producer won't be exploiting the consumer to the maximum. Such a situation would not be regarded as ideal if there is a decrease in the value of total welfare. So when we look at the utilitarianism concept, it looks at the total welfare, but not how the welfare is distributed. In market exchange, not everyone gains equal or even basic minimum welfare. So I can give one example from monopoly structure in markets where producers engage in price discrimination. What is price discrimination? That you charge everyone not the same price, but the price which every person is willing to pay at maximum. So if one person is willing to pay 100 Malaysian ringgit for a particular good, another person is willing to pay 90, another person is willing to pay 80, charge everyone the maximum that they are able to afford and are able to pay. In this kind of a situation in monopoly, the producer is going to capture the consumer surplus from every consumer. The producer surplus is going to be maximum. It would be the total welfare, but the consumers are going to be suffering in a sense that they do not have any welfare. So economics does not take into account equity as much as the concept of efficiency. Can we go to the next slide? All right. Another thing that we see is that in economics, in the last 50 years or so, there is a use of mathematics and the concept of physics in economics. So if we look at what are the different concepts that are used in economics, which also have been used in physics, we would see that a lot of the terms that we come across in economics are basically coming from physics. A lot of top economists who have even got Nobel Prizes have their undergraduate education in either physics or in mathematics. So they engaged in research in economics by thinking of this discipline like applied physics or applied mathematics. So we can look at what are the different concepts that are used in economics, which are basically coming from physics, like the concept of equilibrium, efficiency, steady state, input, output, open system, closed system, dynamic system, static system, friction, velocity, speed, acceleration, momentum, inflation, inertia, gravity, leverage, randomness, expansion, signals, collision, elasticity, waves, drift, buoyancy, bending, cycle, drag, and parity. All of these concepts are basically physics concept, and now they are being used in economics by physicists who have now joined economics as a way to engage in applied physics research. Now they are doing research, but we would see that this research does not help us predict things as precisely or as accurately as we would like it to be. And we also see the use of mathematical tools in economics. So the tools which were developed to understand particle movement, to understand the movement of celestial bodies, to understand the motion of matter that behaves uniformly, we apply those methods to humans who are not like matter, who are not uniform, who are heterogeneous, and who have consciousness, and who do not engage in behaviors which are predictable. So there is heterogeneity in humans, in their approach to things, in their ways of doing things, in their way of making choices, in their way of making decisions. They have free will, they have consciousness. But what we have done is, just to be able to use mathematics and physics, we have made a certain conception about human, which is having a very singular focus on one particular aspect of life and not other aspects of life. And now this approach has made us not being able to predict the human behavior, and it has also caused problems and mistakes in policy making, which now we are faced with. Can we move to the next slide? So if we look at the models, they are very unrealistic. They are based on unrealistic assumptions. So if we look at the general equilibrium model, the person or the firm would be making just one kind of a good, and which would have only one kind of price, or even just numerator price, which means that there is no concept of price at all, just taken as a unity. So there are unrealistic models. The idea was that we can use the unrealistic assumptions as long as we are able to predict. Now, if we look at the prediction power of models, the prediction power of models is very, very weak. They are not able to predict even such a huge crisis like the Great Recession of 2007 and 9. It is not able to anticipate the crisis, and in economic models it is not able to incorporate those events, those abnormalities, those disequilibrium situation. Why? Because they are assumed away. So unemployment is just assumed away from the economic models. Because they want to use mathematics, the role of institution, culture, history, all of that is disregarded because it is not malleable to mathematical norms. So if we can't use it in mathematical model, we just assume them away. But then the model that we get is just a very, very primitive kind of a video game that we can play, that we can run, that would give some result, but it would have no meaning to the real life. So that is what we have seen. Now, when economists discuss policies, when there are policy talks, the policy talks and debates leave abstract theories aside. All of these theories are not really taken into account or are referred when they discuss policies. So they might be having some concern for humanity, for human needs, but then this concern is not coming from the economic models, from the economic theory. This is them looking at things from the perspective of humans. This is just an ad hoc response to political economy, and the political economy guides the course of action. Pressure groups, lobbying, political economy factors, these guide the policies more than the economic theory or the estimates from the economic models. So the mainstream economists, when they discuss policies, they are likely to be correct or incorrect like any other person, like other non-economists, because when economists discuss policies, basically they undermine or disregard their own theories and policies. So can we move to the next slide? So far we have discussed mainstream economics and the limitations in mainstream economics. So now very briefly we are going to discuss what is the Islamic approach. Now first of all, when Islam approaches the economic aspect of humans, it does not approach it like one compartment of life or a complete picture. Islam looks at humans in a comprehensive sense. They have biological needs, they have economic needs, they have spiritual needs, and they live in society. And in the society there are different institutions, and one of the institution is market, which helps people to engage in economic exchange and then fulfill their needs. So Islam is not going to regard market as the only institution that human beings have. Islam would not regard economics as the only thing that matters to human beings. It would look at all the institution and all the different aspects of human life in their own respect, and would look at them from a holistic perspective. So the Islam would approach economics and society from the need and objective based approach. It would not approach it from a priori postulates about human behavior. It would approach from the perspective of needs and objectives that should be fulfilled. So we come across this concept of maqasid sharia in Islamic jurisprudence, which highlights that what are the different ends or objectives that should be kept into view when we discuss policy, like hifdul deen, hifdul nafs, hifdul akal, hifdul nasl, hifdul mal. So if we translate them into the contemporary language, hifdul deen is basically looking at the spirituality aspect of a human being. Hifdul nafs is looking at the physiological aspect. Hifdul akal is looking at the intellect of the human being. Hifdul nasl is looking at the sustainability of life in the society. Hifdul mal is looking at the economy aspect of human beings. So all of these are very comprehensive, and we can see that if we incorporate this kind of approach, it would enable us to approach the problems, the needs, more directly as compared to mainstream economics, which has a dogmatic approach and a very dogmatic attitude towards certain institutions like market, like interest-based financial system, like self-interest based economic pursuits. So here in Islamic economics, what we see is that there is a direct aim towards fulfilling the needs of human beings, and human beings are supposed to have not just economic needs but spiritual needs, physiological needs, intellectual needs, and the need to be able to survive. And when we talk about sustainability of human life, that also requires biodiversity. So it incorporates the concept of not hurting other life forms, which are also necessary for the sustainability of human life. So we can see in the second column of this table that these concepts are giving us an anchor to look at the important issues of today, like the belief system and the value system of Islam emphasizes moderation for the consumer, responsibility in behavior, and justice in economic exchange and also in relationships in society. The concept of protecting physiological needs put emphasis on hunger, malnourishment, stunting, cleanliness, and even sanitation. The concept of Hibdul Akal, the focus on intellect, emphasis on human capital, which includes education, innovation, and also health. Sustainability, Hibdul Nasl, would emphasize on resource conservation, protecting biodiversity, which would enable the other life forms as well as human life to be sustainable and to be responsible to the ecosystem. And then the concept of economy would focus on the economic needs of all people, like employment, need fulfillment, economic opportunities, equitable distribution. So in the Islamic approach, what we see is that we get down to the details very easily, directly, and we are not made oblivious to realities of life. That is the case when we discuss mainstream economics, which assumes away all these different types of problems of underdevelopment or of human indignity or human misery that we see in the form of poverty, in the form of malnourishment, in the form of hunger, in the form of stunting, and so on. So this is the Islamic approach that we see, that it emphasizes on needs of the human beings in society from a holistic perspective. Can we move to the next slide? So another very important thing is that Islamic approach would emphasize values and morality in decisions. First of all, it would make a distinction between needs and wants. When it gives guidelines to consumer, the consumer is going to be urged to engage in moderate consumption of only the halal goods in the choice behavior, and avoid lavishness, envy, pride, boastfulness, and show off. So that would result in people consuming less amount of resources on wants, and there would be enough amount of resources to be spent on needs. And if people have surplus resources, Islamic principles encourage that you pay to charity what you have in excess, pay to charity what is dearest to you. When it comes to producers, the producer is asked to avoid hoarding, exploitation, violating contracts, affecting market price, causing harm, engaging in deceit or fraud. So all of these ethical guidelines try to incorporate values in economic decisions, whether they are taken by consumers, whether they are taken by producers. And all of the people who are consumers as well as producers are urged to feed hungry, to help poor, to engage in pure altruism, meaning that engage in anonymous charitable behavior where your self do not know where your money is going. Cooperate in goodness, and also give the best and dearest thing in charity and pay what is in excess. So this is the ideal that is set by Islam for the consumers and for the producers. Now people, if they believe in these values, if they engage in these values, then it would help us deal with the crisis and emergencies in a much better way as compared to when we solely rely on market mechanism. And Islam also removed extractive financial institutions. So it says that money cannot earn money unless it takes part in real economy through investment in assets or through productive enterprise. So you have to engage in productive enterprise if you have surplus money, or you have to invest in real assets if you want to earn money on money. So this principle enables that we do not have wealth concentration, we do not have capital concentration, we do not have idle capital remaining in the tills of the banks where it is not utilized in the real economy. So if you have surplus resources, you have to make it work in some productive enterprise, or invest in real assets that are used in productive enterprise, so that you can earn money on money. Else you cannot just have interest on the amount of money lent. And it also has a very important feature that when it comes to debts, either they arise from lending of money or from credit sales, these debts are to be paid back at the same value. So if you have given a loan of 1,000 ringgit to someone, when you are going to price back for the asset that you have sold in the credit transaction, you are going to get the exact price that was set at the time of contract. You would not get any additional. So this removal of usury or interest from the intertemporal transactions enables that there is no wealth concentration, and that capital does not remain idle and remains part of the real economy. And also there is preference towards equity-based modes of financing, which focus on the potential of a productive enterprise and skillfulness of a particular person to whom the capital is provided, rather than focusing on collateral and income of the potential client who is needing finance. So these are very important aspects which make the financial system to avoid wealth concentration, capital concentration, leading to economic inequalities, and then also resulting in financial exclusion of the poorer segments of the population. So if we have equity-based modes of financing, if we organize our financial system in a way that there is no concept of usury, debts are repaid in their original values, and money does not earn money unless it takes part in productive enterprise, these kind of principles can make us put focus back on real economy, and to also solve the problems of inequities, concentration of wealth, and so on. Can we move to the next slide now? Can we move to the next slide? Yes. So another point is that there is balance between efficiency and equity. So Islam says that avoid waste in absolute terms, meaning that waste is a bad activity and it should be avoided in absolute terms, not just in relative terms. There is a famous hadith where one companion of Prophet was doing ablution, and there was plenty of water, but still Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, warn the companion that you should not be wasting the resource even if it is plentiful, which means that we should avoid waste in absolute terms, not think about whether it is plentiful resource or not. So what happens is that in market economics, in mainstream economics, we tend to only talk about waste when it comes to market outcomes. But if waste happens outside of markets, we remain oblivious to it. So we have this concept of efficiency in market behavior, which says that we should not be wasting resources. So we were discussing that the Islamic approach to efficiency and equity creates a balance. So it is said in Islamic principle that we should avoid waste in absolute terms, no matter whether we are consumers, whether we are producers, whether we are having any role in society. As long as we are humans, human beings are asked by Islam that we should avoid waste. Now, in market economics, what happens is that when we talk about efficiency, we talk about in the context of market behavior. So avoiding waste is good. Avoiding waste is bad as long as we are in the market framework. But if waste of resources happens outside of market, this is not captured by the economic models. So when economics says that we should be fully utilizing our budget constraint, our cost function when we are producers, they tend to imply that we should not be wasting our resources. We should be utilizing them. We should be putting them to use. If it is possible to increase our marginal revenue more than the marginal cost that we are incurring, we should engage in incremental activity until marginal revenue equals marginal cost. But that is when we are discussing market behavior. When we go outside of market behavior, the concept of waste does not apply. So we see that about $1 trillion worth of food is wasted every year. But market economics does not have anything to say for it. There is no economic model that captures it because this is outside of the market. So Islamic principles say that whether you are engaging in market behavior as a consumer, as a producer or not, you as a human being in all your roles, in all your capacities, and at all times should avoid waste in absolute terms. And then Islamic principles also emphasize respecting the dignity of life, meaning hibdun nafs and hibdun nasl takes precedence, takes priority in policy making. And hibdun nasl would also incorporate not just human life but also other life forms, because biodiversity is also necessary for the sustainable life for humans. If we would make our animals go extinct from which we are sourcing our milk and food and so on, and which is also regulating our ecological environment, then it is going to cause trouble for us as well. It is also going to risk our sustainability as well. So Hifdun Nasl incorporates respecting dignity of life of not just humans but also of other life forms in the cosmos, in the ecology. And Hifdun Nafs concept talks about respecting the dignity of human beings and fulfilling their physiological needs, if not from market sources, also from non-market sources. So the redistribution that happens in the Islamic approach, it happens not just from the market outcomes, but also through market institutions, which I would discuss now. So in Islamic approach, there is obligatory redistribution of resources through the institution of zakat. And then there are other institutions which encourage voluntary redistribution of resources from the haves to the have-nots. So there are 4 such non-market institutions which are very important in redistribution of resources, and their importance can be realized now when we are facing a situation where market institutions are not operating, are closed, there is a lockdown situation, and we can solely rely on these non-market institutions or government. And when we talk about poor countries, they also have weak governments, they also have less taxes collected, so they cannot also rely on government. So these non-market institutions in the Islamic framework are very, very important and very useful to deal with emergency-like situations like the one we are facing now, where market institutions do not operate fully because the resource markets are closed. People who were employed are now getting unemployed. They are getting laid off. So people are not able to get their incomes from the resource market so that they can fulfill their needs from the goods market. When that happens, when the market institution fails to work automatically and naturally, we have to have some non-market institutions which provide the necessary resources from the haves to the have-nots. In the Islamic approach, we have 4 institutions which do the redistribution function. First is zakat. It is the obligatory payment on wealth and income. It redistributes income from the haves to the have-nots. It plays the role of wealth redistribution as well as income redistribution, and it provides income support for the needy. So when we look at the rules of zakat say that a person who has a level of wealth above a particular value is supposed to pay zakat, and the person who has level of wealth below a certain amount of wealth is able to receive zakat. So this threshold value of wealth, which determines who should pay and who can receive, redistributes resources from the haves to the have-nots automatically. And if we look at the institution of sadaqah, it complements zakat. It is the second redistribution institution. It complements zakat in achieving the objectives which zakat achieves, but it is voluntary. It is not obligatory. So people are encouraged to pay what is in excess with them. People are encouraged to pay to charity what is dearest to them. Quran says that your faith is not authenticated unless you pay to charity what is dearest to you. So it is also an important institution, sadaqah, and we are seeing that a lot of people in Muslim communities, they are paying to charity not just the obligatory zakat but also sadaqah, and it is also a very useful resource in a sense that it is having a lot of flexibility in allocation, whereas zakat is allocated on particular heads. The amount that is mobilized through the institution of sadaqah can be allocated, can be used for a lot of purposes, and there is flexibility in allocation. So zakat and sadaqah are two important institutions of redistribution of resources in the Islamic framework. The other two are waqf and the institution of family. When we talk about waqf institution, it basically strengthens the non-market resource flows. So it avoids the private concentration of wealth. It keeps some of the private wealth to philanthropic causes. So then there can be social safety nets which can provide resources flowing from the waqf assets or waqf properties to the poor people who are needy and who may benefit from the incomes that are derived from the waqf assets. So it reduces private concentration of wealth, and it also enhances impact with institutionalization, because when waqf is set up, a particular asset or property, it could be movable, it could be immovable, is donated perpetually for the cause of Allah or for social causes which benefit a particular class of beneficiaries. So a person may dedicate real estate as waqf, and then when this real estate is, let's say, leased to some institution, and there comes rent on those assets, these resources, these incomes can be redistributed to the poor people. So there is possibility of institutionalization of charity through the institution of waqf, and it is also a very good way to keep in society some common property resources from which everyone can benefit. Whereas in market economics, there is no such mechanism. You have to earn your money from the resource market to be able to expand or spend your resources in the goods market. Whereas in Islamic framework, there are certain non-market institutions which help those people who are unable to get incomes and resources from the resource market, maybe because they are less skillful, or maybe because the markets are not able to generate as much employment as is the requirement in the society. And the final very important redistribution institution in Islamic framework is the institution of family, which provides biological, economic, educational, emotional, spiritual, and moral support to individuals. And all of that is just exogenously assumed away or overlooked by mainstream economics. The representative agent just opens eyes and is a skillful person, is having some endowments coming endogenously from heaven or from anywhere, and it is assumed that now he would engage in choice behavior. But that is not the case how human beings are brought up in society. They are brought up by parents, and they are able to fulfill their biological, economic, educational, emotional, spiritual, and moral needs from the institution of family. And the Islamic redistributive institutions also emphasize that it is important that you first pay to the relatives who are closer to you in relations. So this enables that we are able to serve not just our needs, but also the needs of those who are our relatives, who are in our families or extended families. So such a social safety net is very conducive to meet the emergency needs when the market system is not working, and when the resource markets are closed, and when the goods markets are closed. Another very important feature in the institution of family is the inheritance distribution, which reduces private concentration of wealth in every family by distributing every deceased person's wealth to broader group of relatives. So when a person dies, the person is the sole owner of the assets in his or her ownership. But when the inheritance distribution takes place, the wealth of single person is distributed to a lot of different categories of individuals, including family members who are the deceased person's siblings, sons and daughters, parents, spouse, and so on. So what happens is that in every family, inheritance distribution enables that the wealth in the family does not remain concentrated, and in every generation there is redistribution. So these four redistributive institutions, which are non-market institutions, there is no demand and supply framework that is going on in these institutions, but these institutions play a very important role which market economics are not able to play even in the best of times. And in the case of emergency like we are facing today due to the lockdown because of this spread of COVID, this market framework is unable and having less capacity to fulfill the needs of those who are not able to generate incomes now from the resource markets, from the goods market. So even the sailors who are working in the goods market, they are not able to sail. The people who are working in the resource market, they are not able to get employment. So when there is need for income support, from where do we get that? We have the food, we have the resources, which people can use to be able to survive. But when people are not able to afford things, what happens? In the market framework, we only rely on ad hoc policies or the government intervention or progressive taxation, but they are incapacitated. We have seen that even the use of progressive taxation has not been able to decrease the income inequality. In fact, even with progressive taxation, we are seeing that income inequality is increasing because of the extractive financial system, because of the usurious financial system, and there are other factors as well. But in Islamic framework, what we see is that there is a set of institutions like zakat, sadaqah, waqf, and family, which can be used and utilized to check income inequalities, to provide income support, to provide support to the poor people who are not able to get their incomes from the resource markets. And these institutions together are able to fulfill the needs which Islam emphasizes. So summarizing the Islamic approach, what we see is that in the Islamic approach, there is direct focus on needs and objectives. There is an objective based framework which is going to govern the policy, which would enable us to look at things in a holistic sense, not just in a self-interested or self-centric framework. So that is one difference. And then there are certain institutions like Islamic finance, which tries to avoid usury, which tries to avoid the extractive nature of usury. And there are other redistributive institutions which together play a very important role in fulfilling the needs in normal times as well as in times of emergencies. So in the very last slide, I have shown the economic framework that would work in the Islamic paradigm. So we would have the goods market, we would have the resource markets, we would have the people who are consumers, people who are engaging in productive enterprise, who are making goods and selling them in the goods market, and then employing the factors of production to make these goods from the resource markets. But what would happen is that there would be some resource flows outside of market exchange in the form of zakat, in the form of sadaqah, in the form of waqf, and through the institution of families, so that the resources flow and people are able to meet the needs, and we should not be solely reliant on markets to get our share of resources for survival. So in this economic framework, you would see that the flows are very much similar to what we see in the mainstream economic framework, but there is a provision for non-market flows from households to those households who are poor, from the richer households to the poorer households, from households to government, and then the government spends on those households and firms which are in need, which are having trouble. And then firms also support the households through non-market exchange, non-market flow of resources through zakat, waqf, and sadaqah. And firms also support the government, pay the obligatory charity, which is in the form of zakat, and also institutions like waqf, which provide means of income support for the needy people, and which also checks private concentration of wealth. So I hope that this topic was interesting, and there were some points which might have enable you to learn few things about the limitations of mainstream economics, and some of the benefits or some of the characteristic of Islamic economics, which can be useful, which can play a very useful role in society. So I end my talk here so that we can also take some questions and also feedback of the moderator. So I would like to end here. And
okay, thank you, Dr. Salman, for such enlightenment about the pitfall of mainstream economics and how Islamic economics can attempt to counter the issues. We have a lot of interesting questions here. Firstly, perhaps I would like to address these questions. So we know that Islamic economics is the solution of the problem. But having those normative value, many argue that the implementation is really difficult because some even say that it is kind of utopia. How you address such argument?
yes, if we look at the mainstream policy making is also ad hoc. It does not really take cue from economic theories, because theory says that markets always clear. The Say's law of market does not entertain the idea that there can be disequilibrium. Supply creates its own demand. So they are basically having the utopian view of life, where they think that markets always clear. There is not a possibility that a person can be unemployed intentionally. So when Great Depression happened, some economists who are from the classical economics, they were trying to explain it through self-interested behavior. They were trying to say that maybe people do not want to work at the prevailing wage rate. Now, this sounds very absurd because people who were happening, they were not getting the work. So when they do not get work, there is surplus in the labor market. The supply of labor is more than the demand for labor. Now, this kind of disequilibrium was not entertained by classical economics until Keynes came and said that disequilibrium may last for a longer time period, and unless we take measures, we are intervening through institutions so that we are able to deal with the situation of disequilibrium. And since the Islamic approach identifies the objectives that we should be taking into account in our policy making, it does not remain inflexible or misguided. When we look at the mainstream economics, we see that we have one policy for the people who are living in the country and a completely different policy for people who are not living in that country. So when economists are making policies inside the host countries where they live and where they are the citizens of that country, they would suggest one policy. But when they join IMF and World Bank, they would suggest completely different thing to the poorer countries. So when IMF gives loans to poor countries, it encourages that you reduce subsidies, you increase the indirect taxes, and you take measures which might create inflation, unemployment, but still they suggest it because what they are concerned with is their money. They want to get paid back. So they would suggest some policies which are not good for the poor countries, but are good for those institutions who are lending. So when we have a self-interested behavior, then people would have such policies which are contradictory in space and time, and which are also going to not avoid the element of self-interestedness or selfish self-interest.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes.
We have another questions. It's related with the current issue about COVID-19. So, what is the contribution of Islamic economics for increasing social prosperity, social growth, economic growth, especially having this supply and demand shock due to the COVID-19 and lockdown and many policy issues that stop the economic activities? Is there any exit strategy from Islamic economics?
Yes, what we are seeing is that the social finance is playing a very important role in Muslim communities, in Muslim majority countries. So the redistributive institution that we have talked about, like zakat, like sadaqah, like waqf, they are playing a very important role. And Indonesia is a very good example where we have institutions like Puskas Basnas, which is working day and night to provide relief support and income support to the poor. And we see that these institutions are absent in mainstream economics. And even if we see these institutions in the Western societies, they are not really taken as rational by the economists, because Milton Friedman, who was father of monetary economics, he said that the only business of business is to do business and to maximize the shareholders' wealth. We should not be thinking about society. That is what he meant to be saying. But we see that the Islamic approach is different. We are having more apathy, we are empathy, we are having more pro-social behavior, and we have institutions that can convert the pro-social impulses into actions, into institutions which can then do the social intermediation in the time period when the market institutions are not working properly. So I am seeing that a lot of Muslim majority countries rank very high on the world giving index. So we pay generously, we help each other, we have the community work going on. So all of these are very important contributions. They might be not completely adequate in certain situations, but still they complement the gap that is there when we have markets not working. So
we may have one last question. Yes. We have one more questions. It is the last one, inshallah. As you know, we will face Ramadan during this issue about COVID-19 and its impact on economics. Do you have any suggestion or sharing to us? How should we bring the aspiration of Islamic economics value in our life, especially having Ramadan and COVID-19?
Yes, what we see is that in a lot of different parts of the world, people tend to pay zakat when the month of Ramadan starts. And we have seen that a lot of scholars have come forward and have said that even if the zakat is not due now for a person who pays zakat on a particular date of the year, the people can pay zakat even in advance. So this can enable those people who are having difficulty to overcome their difficulties and get the resources what they need just right now. So Ramzan is a very important month for Muslims, and we do fasting. And the essence of fasting is to have self-restraint, and also it gives us a feeling about others who might be not having enough food to eat, not because of their self taking choices, but because they are not able to afford. So we going through fasting should be thinking about those people who are not able to feed themselves, not out of choice but out of compulsion. So we have to be supportive to them in Ramadan and also after Ramadan, and we have to show that our value system gives us this guideline that we always should be responsible, and we should not just stick to our self-interestedness. We should not have a self-centric approach, and Islam guides us that the excellence that we want to reach is to pay to charity what is dearest to us and pay whatever is in excess to us. So if we have surplus resources, excess resources, then Islam encourages us to share these resources with those people who are not able to afford. And the overall concept of Islamic worldview, which says that we have originated from singularity, from a single source of creation, it means that we are like everyone else. We are not different if we have more resources. It's just that our Creator has given us more resources, and now after fulfilling our needs, we have to pass on these resources to the other creations of the Creator. And we should be helping our fellow human beings, Muslims as well as non-Muslims as well, through different institutions as well, which we have in the Islamic framework. And if we engage in pro-social behavior in the Islamic worldview, it does not go wasted. And Islam promises that we would have a manifold increase, not just in terms of income while spending in charity, but through other sources, like we would be having more contentment of heart if we engage in compassionate behavior. Whereas if we look at other worldviews, they basically implicitly encourage that we should be selfish, and that is how we are born like, and that is how we have come to this world through the competition of survival of the fittest. But Islamic worldview does not say that. It says that we are created from a single source. So we should not be thinking of ourselves being distinct from the other creations. We should be responsible, we should be compassionate, and all of the pro-social choices that we take, they would be giving us good results, not only in this life, but in the life to come as well.
Thank you for such deep answer about Ramadan and COVID and this Islamic economics. So because we are the run of the time, I will try to conclude all this really comprehensive material from Dr. Salman. So basically, wealth in Islam is regarded as is regarded that everything belong to Allah, and we as human being are the Khalifah. So we are responsible in managing those wealth, those everything in our earth according to His command to us, especially by sharing, especially by helping the others, because we have not only in this dunya, but we have hereafter where we are judged whether we go to Jannah or Jahannam. So this shape altruism in Islamic perspective, where for example in Prophet era Ansar welcome the Muhajirin by giving all things to them, not because this is a charity, but because it is the responsibility, it is the privilege that Ansar has had at the moment. So thank you, Dr. Salman, for your willingness to share your knowledge here. It is really amazing for us to have you here. I hope what you share can benefit more people, can give impact, especially having this issue about COVID and Ramadan. So once again, thank you, and thank you as well for Basnas and everyone who watched this video. You may share and give you the comments in the giving the comments. Inshallah, Dr. Salman will respond it after this session. So thank you again. That's all from us, Puskas Basnas. We will conduct this webinar regularly, inshallah. So stay tuned. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Bagimu, siapa seorang manusia yang bisa dikatakan punya makna? Apakah dia yang memilih menetap di hidupmu? Atau dia yang ditakdirkan hanya mampir sementara waktu? Apakah makna manusia dimiliki mereka yang selalu punya kuasa untuk menggerakkan? Atau mereka yang terkadang membutuhkan pegangan untuk bertahan? Karena jika kita mau memahami, semuanya punya perannya sendiri-sendiri. Dia yang di dalam rumah dan berdiam diri, yang harus melakukan sesuatu, yang merisikokan diri sendiri, yang menjaga, yang bertahan, juga ia yang harus pergi. Pada akhirnya, sesulit apapun untuk diterima, manusia bukan hanya sebuah nama, bukan juga deretan angka. Setiap manusia, disadari ataupun tidak, punya maknanya sendiri-sendiri bagi hidup kita.